individuals will not be allowed to be turned over to ICE. So that's what we have to do, is have a physical presence on the ground so we can find those individuals when they're released and we can apprehend them. That's why we have that large physical presence.
And I understand, I've actually been on the ICE ride along. It was much more targeted. I think what we're seeing here, and we're going to discuss this a little bit later, you're seeing more sweeps, you're seeing so many more agents than what has been done in the past. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but I want to follow up on the question at hand. Does DHS believe it is currently able to do its job in Minneapolis, or do you need the military to come in and help you?
I'm not going to get ahead of the president here, but what I will say why we've surged resources, you mentioned that large footprint. The reason we're seeing that is because state and local law enforcement are not allowed to engage with us. If our law enforcement is being attacked or obstructed, which we're seeing that rampantly across the board time and time again, state and local law enforcement can't answer our calls for backup. That means the public is more at risk and our law enforcement is more at risk as well.
Secretary Noem, your boss, said yesterday she will not be pulling out of Minnesota anytime soon. How many federal immigration agents are currently in that state, and how many more are being sent?
I can't speak to how many more are being sent. We're looking around 2,500 on the ground there. And part of that is Homeland Security investigations, of course, as well. You all have covered that rampant fraud we've seen out of Minneapolis. $9 billion, that's just the tip of the iceberg. So our Homeland Security investigators, they're going around, they're collecting information, following leads, and trying to get accountability for the American people.
Secretary Noem also told reporters yesterday that ICE may ask people to, quote, validate their identity when asked about Americans carrying proof of citizenship. Should you clarify what exactly that means? Do American citizens, as of now, need to carry their passports or other immigration documents to show that they're citizens?
I am so glad you asked this question because I think that there's a lot of confusion there about this. We have incredibly targeted immigration enforcement operations. So what's happening there is there is reasonable suspicion. If somebody is in the vicinity of this operation, of this target, then they could be asked for their identification. We've been vindicated by the Supreme Court, September of 2025. You all saw a case out of Los Angeles where they said we can use reasonable suspicion. I think I've seen a lot on this network and other places where they're talking about this is racially based. Absolutely not. Racial animus is no place in DHS and is, of course, not used. We're using what is protected under the 4th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution.
All right, let's dive a little bit deeper into that. Absolutely. I want to play this video of a recent incident in Minnesota that has received attention.
Do you have an ID on you, ma'am?
I don't need ID to walk around in my city. This is
okay, do you have some IDs then, please?
I don't need
If not, we're going to put you in the vehicle and we're going to ID you. Please.
I am your citizen. I don't need to carry around an ID in my home.
Well,
this is my home.
Where were you born?
This is my home.
Where were you born?
Minneapolis is my home.
So that video was filmed by a woman who, as you heard, said she is a U.S. citizen. Why exactly was she stopped? Was there reasonable suspicion, which is a legal bar, as you noted, that a crime was committed in that situation? And why was he asking her, where are you born? Like, what was he basing that on?
Sure. So either this is, and I haven't seen this video before, so there could be two circumstances here. Either this is a target operation and she's around the vicinity of it, around the target. There's reasonable suspicion because there might be a descriptor, or she could be 5'6" and they're looking for somebody who's 5'6". That could be part of it. They're looking for somebody. That could be part of it. The other piece of it is it could be, I don't know if she was obstructing law enforcement, if she was assaulting law enforcement prior to this, but they either had those Title 8 authorities under the U.S. Code 1357 or they had that reasonable suspicion.
But what do you say to those who watch that and other videos that they're seeing themselves? I mean, this is not just the mainstream media. This is, people are seeing these videos and they're concerned that a place like Minnesota is turning into a police state and they're going up to U.S. citizens asking for ID and you know, using
I think that there's a lot of fear mongering going on, I think, by the media.
But it's not, hold on, let me just correct you right there. Let me just, they're watching these videos and using their independence of mind. It's not the media.
No, actually it is the media. We're seeing it time and time again by saying things like the police state. What we're seeing is rampant violence against our law enforcement, highly coordinated. We have our legal authorities. When individuals see videos like that, you have to ask the question, was this individual obstructing law enforcement, which is a federal crime? Were they assaulting law enforcement, which is a felony? Were any of those instances occurring before this video was cut? Because you saw a very short cut, and that's what I'm talking about the media. There is not a lot of context that's being out there.
Then why
to
do
be
you allow ICE officers to wear the cameras?
We of course allow them to wear. They also
they all have, will they all have body cameras?
We are working on that with the one big beautiful bill. Actually, I think we can talk about the incident from last week where that
Hold on, this
enforcement officer,
though.
if I can finish,
Yeah.
that law enforcement officer, he actually filmed himself being obstructed by these individuals who are on the ground, who are harassing him, this vehicle being blocked in, and that actually largely vindicated him. And actually everything that DHS has said up until that point was corroborated.
Well, I mean, it hasn't been corroborated. The investigation is ongoing. The secretary came out shortly after and said that the victim here, Renee Good, was a domestic terrorist.
Yes.
And we've spoken to many experts who said at the very least, we don't have enough facts, there's not enough information, and it's too early in the investigation to make that claim. And, you know, just going back to what you say about the media, we're talking to people on the ground. And look, maybe some of them don't like ICE, they don't like law enforcement at all, so they could be saying this.
Yeah.
But you have to look at the polling, right? This isn't the media, this is actual polling that says, hey, I like what ICE is doing in terms of its target. We want to get criminals off the street who don't belong in the country. But 51% say ICE makes cities less safe. Just 31% say it makes cities more safe. On the Renee Good case you brought up, 26% of Americans viewed the shooting as an appropriate use of force, while 56% called it an inappropriate use of force. So are you willing to consider in some cases ICE has gone too far and is losing American support?
Pamela, in the last 5 weeks,
Thank
we
you
had
so much
arrested
for holding.
2,500
May I have your
criminal
social
legal aliens
security
off of the streets of Minneapolis.
No one
If I
like
can
that.
finish, if I can make my point, I appreciate you having me, but I do want to be able to make my point.
Sure.
The point of the matter is, I have not seen CNN cover who some of those
You did,
individuals
right?
are. An individual from Ecuador, he murdered his 3-month-old son. An individual who's perpetuating human slavery and human trafficking. Scores and scores of murders, child pedophiles. Why does the media not talk about that? We continue to see that people love to demonize law enforcement, vilify them as they're facing a 1,000% increase in assaults against them. And yet we're not talking about the great work that they're doing on the ground, the fact that they are risking their lives day in and day out to get these criminals off the ground. Gang members, known as suspected terrorists. These are all the people that we've arrested in Minneapolis. And DHS has, and Secretary Noel, President Trump, have done a phenomenal job of trying to give people transparency on who we are arresting. And yet we're sitting here talking about relitigating cases over and over and
Well,
over
a U.S.
again.
citizen was killed by an ICE officer.
Yes,
That's fair. I talked about the polls. It's a fair question to say, are you losing American support? But Wolf, I'm going to let you.
Please.
No one supports attacking, killing
No.
a law
Exactly. No one
enforcement
does.
officer. Nobody supports that.
But if I may say, you all have said, really laying the feet at that ICE enforcement officer. We said
I
that
said
this
it
was
early in the
domestic.
investigation.
We said that this was domestic terrorism for a reason. This individual used a deadly weapon against our ICE law enforcement officer.
Right.
That is and will be charged. In any of the cases, we saw 15 of these cases over the past week alone in Minneapolis. Those will be charged as domestic terrorism.
And when she called this 37-year-old mother of 3 who was driving that car a domestic terrorist, that really was outrageous.
We said it was an act of domestic terrorism. In no way is that outrageous. What we saw on the ground there, she had been stalking and harassing law enforcement throughout the morning, and then she went on to use her car as a deadly weapon.
She was driving by after dropping off a little 6-year-old boy
That's
at
just
school.
simply not true. I have the facts on the ground. I mean, if you look at it, for the
Do you
hours
have more
before,
information you can release to give the public a better understanding?
if I can give you the facts of what happened that morning at 9:30 a.m. Central Time, this is where that incident occurred in Minneapolis. This individual for hours before had been stalking and harassing law enforcement, impeding operations. At the time of that incident, our law enforcement approached this individual's vehicle as she was blocking in our law enforcement. That is a federal crime. They asked her to get out of the car to stop obstructing law enforcement. You saw from the video that her partner had been walking around harassing the law enforcement officer. Our officer was in front of her. She gunned the vehicle, and that's when things turned dangerous and deadly. If you don't listen to lawful commands of federal law enforcement, if you use your vehicle as a weapon, that is absolutely an act of domestic
Hold on
terrorism.
really quick. I mean, you just mentioned he stepped in front of the vehicle, and there is no confirmation. I mean, there have been different analysis of this vehicle, and of course we would love more facts to fill in the picture. But she's also turning the wheel, and he did step in front of the vehicle as part of this. Is that part of the training for ICE agents during an encounter with the vehicle?
When you're trying to when they're being blocked, when you're being impeded, when
the cars were going by.
Cars were being, you're not seeing a full video. There are cars behind this individual that could not get through. So again, we're talking about manipulative editing and only showing, we're only showing part of the video. Pamela, there's a very simple,
any more evidence
if
that
I
you
could
can
say
release
one
to the
thing,
public?
there is a very simple solution here. Tim Walz and Mayor Frey should let us into their jails. Those 1,400 individuals, those criminal illegal aliens who have already had their due process, let us in those jails. Let us take those murderers, those rapists, those child pedophiles out. That would simply solve the solution. Work with state and local law enforcement. That is what we're asking. Down in Florida, there's been 40,000 arrests of criminal illegal aliens. We've seen peace. We've seen public safety. That's what we should be seeing across the nation.
Tricia, I want you to listen and watch what your boss, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary Nome, said yesterday alongside another video of a recent encounter in Minnesota. Listen to this.
The officers that we have out there are very highly trained and skilled, specific for the operations that they're doing. They're utilizing the most gifted individuals on these operations to go out and to do enforcement, because many times if they're going after murderers.
And we also saw that video of a woman being pulled out of her car as she was trying to simply go to the doctor. Is that what?
That is, she was not going to the doctor.
Is what you're seeing there? Are these the officers are trained to do? They cut off her seatbelt, they dragged her out of the car and took her out?
This individual was actually arrested because she was time and time again impeding law enforcement officers. Again, a small snippet of this video. So she was an agitator, intentionally, again, trying to impede federal law enforcement officers, which is a federal crime. It is a felony.
How do you know for certainty, though, that she wasn't just caught up in the protests and the traffic and the chaos and was trying to get to? How do you know
because
that
she
for
was
certain?
doing this time and time again, over and over and over again. We talked to federal law enforcement on the ground. We talked to their supervisors. In this case, we know exactly what happened here, and she'll be charged as such.
Okay, so let me just ask you, going back to the Renee Good, I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
what is the status of that ICE agent that was involved in the shooting, and can you give any more clarity into his injuries?
Yeah, he's on leave right now. He's spending time with his family. Obviously, this is a very difficult time for him and for his family. As we've confirmed before, he had internal bleeding, was sent to the hospital.
Can you elaborate on that? Because doctors you've spoken to say normally, and I'm not trying to minimize, I don't know what the injury was, but they say normally if you have internal bleeding, you would stay longer than a day. He was released the same day. Was this bruising, or can you give us any better indication of what the injury was?
I haven't spoken to this individual's doctor. I just know he's on leave. He was pretty banged up, internal bleeding, and we pray for him and his family. And this is, anytime there's a loss of life, it is a tragedy. In this case, it's an absolute tragedy. But Pamela, what I think again is so important, especially as we see these rioters, you have to listen to lawful commands
And
of
that is
federal
true.
law enforcement. If I can finish my point, you cannot obstruct or impede law enforcement. You cannot assault law enforcement, which we're seeing over and over again in the streets. We're seeing being spit on. These vehicle rammings are up 3,200%. That is a deadly weapon being used against law enforcement officers. So there's a way to peacefully protest. That First Amendment, of course, is a precious right we have, unfortunately, on the ground. And in that case with Renee Good, that is not peaceful protest.
So what is the ICE agents training to handle protesters and protecting their First Amendment rights and their Fourth Amendment rights? Do they have extensive training in crowd control? Because I know just from me covering it over the years, their task is to go do immigration enforcement, not doing crowd control. So perhaps, is this a situation that's different for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Conflict management, they're trained in, driving training, firearm training, de-escalation training. They're absolutely trained on that. And as far as their training, I know I've seen a lot of coverage on here saying that they have lower standards. That's absolutely not true. The timeline was truncated so that there's more intensive training down in our facility in Georgia. But the reason, again, why we've sent more federal law enforcement officers is because when we're seeing obstruction, when we're seeing assault rampant against our law enforcement officers, they still need to be able to carry out their lawful duties in enforcement operations. So that's why we have federal law enforcement that's been surged there so that they can continue to carry out those duties. That's safe for the public, safe for the migrant themselves, and safe for our law enforcement
And certainly,
officers.
again, just to reiterate what Wolf said, no one should endorse assaults against officers, impeding valid investigations, and even the officials there in Minnesota have called for peaceful protests. But before we let you go, I want to ask you about the recruitment. You talked about, the training they get.
Yeah.
There's an ICE recruiting poster, and it read, quote, "We'll have our home again," that's gone viral. That phrase is cited as having ties to white nationalist groups in the U.S. and Canada, and a database of symbols maintained by the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism. I want to let you explain that. And also, even if this is not intentional, do you denounce this if it's if this could be seen as a dog whistle to white
We'll
supremacists?
have our home again is now a white nationalist dog whistle. I mean, what do they even what is that a dog whistle to?
Well, it's
By the way, I had a feeling you would ask me about this. I was
name? 'Cause
There's
it's been
plenty of
reported.
poems.
It's
There's
gotten a
plenty.
lot of
There's
attention.
plenty. Yes, and there's no reason that we should be manufacturing outrage. There are plenty of
It's not
plenty. It is actually. There are plenty of policy disagreements we should be having, and I really believe we should be having. Manufacturing fake outrage is not that. There are plenty of poems, there are plenty of songs, there are plenty of books with the same title, and the fact that people would like to cherry pick something of white nationalism to make some sort of connection to DHS law enforcement, well, it's no wonder we're seeing such vast, rampant assaults against our law enforcement. It's no wonder Secretary Noem is facing so many threats against her life. Tom Homan across the board is because of garbage like this and people choosing to manufacture outrage. I think it's quite frankly embarrassing.
Well, I wanted to give you the chance to respond. Again, this came from the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism. Thank you very much for coming on, Tricia McLaughlin. We appreciate your time to give DHS its side of the story.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks very much for coming in. And right now, the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Machado, is about to hold a press conference here in Washington after handing over her Nobel Peace Prize and leaving the White House with a Trump swag bag. We're going to bring you her latest remarks. That's coming up. And could